friends, it is lovely to see you. If we have not met before, my name is Eleanor, also known as Cozy Books and Knits online. It is lovely to meet you. I live in a Victorian cottage in the countryside with my husband-to-be and my 2 cats, and I have dedicated my life to learning everything crafty that I possibly can, so it is absolutely lovely to have you along for the journey. Now, today we are talking about one of the things on this earth that I am the most passionate about, and that is sock knitting, which is a very funny sentence to say, but I am so passionate about sock knitting. It's my favourite thing. It's the thing that got me into knitting. It is the thing that made me want to learn to knit, and I love sharing that knowledge with the world because I know the idea of sock knitting, if you've never knit socks before, can be really daunting, and if you pick a pattern that doesn't quite fit you right, it can be really difficult to know how to amend that to work for yourself. But I promise, once you get your foot anatomy down to a T and the recipes that you like, you will be away. So today we're going to talk through some of my favourite things about sock knitting, some of the supplies that I use regularly, my favourite needles. We're going to talk a bit about troubleshooting certain elements, particularly to do with colourwork, so we'll talk about colourwork a fair bit. I've got lots of my favourite things to show you, and then I also did a Q&A over on Instagram, so I have all of those questions here to answer for you. So if you left a question, thank you very much, we'll talk about it later. If not, then you can pop me a follow on Instagram, my link is down below, and then you'll be able to join in next time. Or if you've got a question, just leave it down below in the comments and I'll answer it for you. Today I am drinking a cup of tea from this glazed travel mug, which is just needlessly cute. It's adorable. I don't need to be using travel cup inside, but it's so cute and I couldn't not. I love it so much. So I'm having a cup of tea. Why not grab yourselves a nice cozy drink as well and come and sit down and let's chat everything to do with sock knitting. So a good couple of years ago now, I had learnt to knit in the past, so I knew the basic knit, stitch, purl stitch, and I knew nothing else. Over the years, every time we'd come around to sort of winter time, I would go, oh, I really wish I could knit socks. Because I love cozy socks, I love warm, textured bed socks, all those lovely, cute, cozy things. And I really wanted to be able to make them for myself. So I tried so many different methods to avoid just learning properly about knitting and about sock knitting. So I tried to crochet them, but they always came out so thick, and weirdly, walking on like crochet stitches would actually hurt the soles of my feet, which I know is really odd, but I think it was just how thick the individual knots are. And if you'd use a tight gauge stitch, then yeah, they would be really, really thick and bulky. And if I used a looser gauge stitch, then they would just be so holey. So crocheting socks never worked for me. I did like sort of slipper socks, but I could never get a proper really nice fitting sock. I tried knitting them flat, which was just ridiculous. I did everything to avoid learning how to knit properly, and I even learnt to knit them on all the totally wrong needles in acrylic yarn with the wrong gauge, the wrong materials, and I couldn't quite work out why it wasn't working, and I just thought it's too hard, it's too difficult to knit socks. But then I decided, I think it was when I started seeing Stone Knits patterns on Instagram, and if you know anything about sock knitting, you know Stone Knits. Her patterns are just the absolute cutest, most adorable colourwork socks on the planet. She's a genius. So a few years ago I committed to actually learning how to knit socks properly. So I bought all the right supplies, and since then I have been on a journey of trying out all the different sort of techniques, supplies, needles, to find everything that I love the most and consuming the most I can about how to better improve the fit of socks, and it's just a real passion of mine. I don't know what it is, it's just something about the fact that they're small and portable make them just the perfect project for taking out and about, going and sitting in a coffee shop. It's just ideal, and I think there's such a kind of short-term gratification of a pair of socks because they don't take that long to knit. So it's just a thrilling process from start to end is sock knitting. So I always have at least one pair on the go, if not multiple as I do currently. And they are just my favourite thing. There's something about when I sit and I look at sock patterns that just brings me so much joy that I cannot explain. It's just, yeah, I'm a sock knitting lover at heart. And one day I would absolutely love to start designing my own socks because I've got all these ideas about things that I would love to make. And I haven't yet, but one day. Let's begin. I think the first category, which is one I'm sure a lot of you will be interested in, is needles. So we're going to talk about needles. My personal preference for sock knitting is the little tiny baby 9-inch circular needles. These, as you can see, it is just one small circle and it makes knitting a sock so easy. You're just going round and round and round. You're not thinking about moving between different needles. You are not thinking about, you know, having to reposition your stitches on the needle. You're just going round and round. It's beautiful. It's seamless. It makes for a lovely knitting experience. When I first tried the 9-inch circular, I did not get on with it at all. And there were two reasons for that. So if you're not getting on with the 9-inch circulars, this might be why. The first reason is that the first pair I tried were really cheap. And as you can see here, this is a set of ChiaoGoo 9-inch red lace needles in a 2.5mm stainless steel tip. That is the join there. And my stitches just glide smoothly and completely seamlessly over the join between the cable and the needle. And that's it. And that is why I will be a die-hard ChiaoGoo sock needle girly till the day I die. They are the best ones. I have tried other brands, small circumference 9-inch circulars, and I just think that the ChiaoGoo ones are the best because that is what you need. Is you need the stitches to glide from the cable to the needle seamlessly. Makes all the difference. So the first pair I tried, that join was not smooth, so I just didn't feel like, I felt like I was kind of wrestling with the needles to get the stitches to go onto the needle really easily. And if you've got looser tension than me, that might not be the issue. I don't think my tension is particularly tight. I think it's quite average. However, especially when I was learning, it was tighter. So I just found that my stitches didn't glide. So that is my top tip, is invest in a pair of really, really good quality 9-inch circulars if you're going to do it, because the cheap ones just will get you nowhere and it'll be a waste of money. So that's it. My other one is that I was really, really gripping onto the needles themselves, which made it a really difficult sort of process because the needles are so small. So now kind of what I do is I grip the fabric underneath the needle, and that is how I manipulate the needles. So I'm not actually really holding the needles, I'm kind of just resting them on my fingers and gripping the actual fabric of the sock. And for me, that means that, again, they just glide so much easier and I feel like I have more grip, more support. It's because I sort of hold the fabric rather than the needle itself. So that's one of my tips for anyone who doesn't get on with the 9-inch circulars, but I would say it's worth persisting with because I find them to be a much better solution. I again use a pair of red lace ChiaoGoo needles. I do also have a pair of Addy, but I still prefer the ChiaoGoos. I think the join is flawless. It's so smooth and they make for such a nice knitting experience. I think when I first started knitting socks, I was using the magic loop method, and I was using a pair of Knit Pro, just the standard Zings that you see everywhere, that are probably the most common needles for beginners, and I just felt like I was wrestling with that join all the time, with trying to get, I felt like I was spending just as much time wrestling stitches onto the needles as I was knitting them. So that never worked for me, and at first I thought that was because I hated magic loop, and I still don't enjoy magic loop greatly, but a huge portion of that was the needles. So I do think my absolute #1 tip for sock knitting is invest in really good quality needles that are the ones that you like. And the good thing about sock knitting is not that you need loads of different sizes. Generally, I'll use a 2.25 and a 2.5 and maybe a 2.75 if I'm doing Colourwork, but that's just because of my huge feet. So the majority of people will only need those 2 sizes for fingering weight socks, and it's always going to be the same circumference, so you just need those 2 pairs of needles. So it's worth the investment to get a pair of needles that really work for you. So if you want to go for magic loop, it's fine, but again, it's the same thing, that join from the cable to the needle needs to be seamless, and I have found nothing better than ChowGoo thus far. The third option is an option that so many people hate, and it is the most traditional short circumference knitting method, and that is DPNs. And when I first started knitting, and before I tried the 9-inch circulars, or when I tried a 9-inch circular that was rubbish and I didn't like it all, I thought I just hated the 9-inch circulars. So I spent a long time looking for the perfect set of DPNs. So I knit on DPNs for socks for a long time before I went back to the 9-inch circulars and just got the ChowGoos. So I have Zings, I have higher, I'm dropping them, I have really sharp higher, I have Knit Pro Symphonies, I've got all sorts of different DPNs here, and my favourites are the Knit Pro Symphonies. They are butter soft and wool just absolutely glides over them beautifully. So if I ever use DPNs, generally these are the ones I use, although they are very fragile because they are very thin wood. So if you are prone to sitting on your knitting bags, I don't know anyone who may have done that, then maybe not, which is why obviously I have lots of metal ones as well. The Zings, whilst I don't like the Zings for the magic loop or the 9-inch circulars, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the Zings in the DPN. They are just cheap and cheerful. There is nothing wrong with these. I just enjoy trying different needles, which is why I ended up accumulating a few pairs. I needed the sharpness. You can see the difference in the tip between the higher. You can see the difference between the Symphony, the Zings, and the higher sharps. So I got the higher sharps for knitting cables and such on a very small circumference, and those are still really helpful. I would like a pair of sharp 9-inch circulars. The only problem is that they just stab through your knitting bag. So I'll be holding them like on a shoulder bag in a tote, and they'll just get stabbed in the side. Again, not great for taking on the go. So you can see the difference. So they do have their place. The wooden ones just have that lovely glide. The sharp ones are great for knitting tiny miniature cables, but all in all, the ChowGoo 9-inch circular still comes out on top, in my personal opinion. So the next thing I thought we would talk about is what is in my sock knitting project bag. And shameless plug, but this project bag is from my upcoming drop on my Etsy store, which is not currently live, but will be. So cute little quilted star. So I'm going to show you, when I knit socks, what do I carry with me and what do I like to use, what do I have in my kit. So obviously I have the sock I'm currently knitting. This is the Ocean Drive socks by Pip and Pin. Absolutely gorgeous. So I have this sock in there on my ChowGoo 9-inch circulars, and then I have all of the different balls of wool that I'm using for the Colourwork. I then also have any other sizes of needle that I might need, because I do a 2.25 for the cuff and then 2.5 for the body of the sock. So I have any other needles I might like to use. I also have a set of magic loop needles, thick circulars, or a set of DPNs. I prefer the 80cm loop for knitting socks, but these are a 60cm and they work too. Then I usually have a little crochet hook to fix any mistakes. I don't know what it is about tape measures, but they always disappear on me. I always have one, it's always gone. So I had one, don't know where that's gone, so I've gone and got another one. So I always have a tape measure in my kit. And I usually have some scrap yarn for afterthought heels. Then I have a little notions pouch, and in my notions pouch I will have any other short circumference needles I need. I will have a length of barber cord if I need to try the socks on, or if I need to put any stitches on hold while I work a different part of the sock. Oodles of stitch markers. I like to have one with a bit of something to be my beginning of round marker, and then I like to have a pair of either little round ones or light bulb ones to be my decrease markers for working on heels. I also tend to have lots and lots of these, and I will put one in every 10 rows, every 20 rows to mark the progress, so I can count how long the legs are, the feet are, so that I can make sure the second sock matches perfectly. So I tend to have absolutely loads of these little light bulb markers, and then I'll have a couple like, you know, like little round markers like that, or like this one, just to help with heels and marking any increases or decreases that need to be done, and then a tapestry needle for weaving in ends and Kitchener stitching heels and toes together. And I believe that is everything I tend to have in my sock knitting bag when I'm knitting socks. And it's so nice because there's not that much, and it can fit in, you know, a pretty small, it could even fit in a smaller project bag than this. So I can just have everything I need, I can take it wherever I like, and I could start a project from beginning to end with everything I need in one bag. So let's talk colour work. I know this is often one of the things that people want to do the most but struggle with the most when it comes to do with socks. For me, yes, it is a problem. I have really wide feet and a really high instep. So I would say one of my first tips for knitting colourwork socks is to know your foot anatomy. It's something people who are not knitters don't tend to think about. I mean, like when you were a kid getting fitted for school shoes and stuff, I'm sure you thought a lot about the width of your foot, and they gave you all the many different sizes of foot width. But then when you get to adulthood, suddenly it's just normal or wide. But actually there's a lot of components that make up the shape of our foot. And when we are working with something that needs to fit really well, but doesn't necessarily have that much stretch, those things come back into play. So if you have an awkward shaped foot or problems with sizes of your feet, don't worry, because there will be a way to make it work for you. So I would say number one tip is understand your foot anatomy, understand your instep. So I would, you know, work out if you have wide feet or if you have narrow feet. I'm sure you'll know that. If you have normal feet or super wide feet, that's something generally we know throughout our life, but a lot of the time we don't consider our instep. And actually I was reading an Instagram post from a designer called In Her Skein, I'll link her down below, the other day, and she put this post that was really, really interesting, where she polled her audience's instep sizes, which sounds a really weird thing to do, but actually to me it was really fascinating. So she polled, I think it was 63 people, and she found out that on average between those people who replied, that if the difference between your instep, and when we're talking about instep, so we're talking about the bottom of your heel diagonally up to the curvature between your ankle and the top of your foot, that generally is your instep. That shows you how big that space is from the bottom of your heel to the top of your, to the highest point of the top of your foot. For some people that is quite small, for some people that's quite high. So measure your instep. It's weird, do it. It will be so helpful to you. Measure your instep. And then if you measure the widest part of your foot, if you subtract the widest part of your foot from your heel measurement, I will link this post that explains all of this down in the description, by the way. If you subtract that, she found that generally on average, if that was 8.5 centimeters or less, you had a regular instep. If that was 8.5 centimeters or higher, that is a high instep, and mine was 10 centimeters, so that's a fair bit over that 8.5, which just confirmed what I already knew, because we talk about wide feet, and I'd been trying to make my Colourwork socks wider and wider and wider, and I was still confused as to why they weren't fitting. I would get to the point where they were wide enough for my feet, but I couldn't get them over the heel, and that is because that's your instep, so that's going to be the proportion between how wide the sock is and how much bigger than that measurement your foot is. So this is getting really like into the nitty-gritty here, but what I like to do is I'll take that measurement of my instep, which in my case is 32 centimeters. If I half that, you get 16 centimeters, which is the sort of diameter of my instep. So then I know that my sock cuff needs to be able to stretch at least 16 centimeters. So if I start knitting a cuff, if I start knitting a Colourwork portion, but I don't necessarily have enough to try on yet, or it's quite a pain to get them off the stitches onto barber cord and then try and get it on, I know that if it can stretch 16 centimeters, it's going to fit over my instep. So that is what I'm aiming for, it doesn't have to be 16 centimeters like that, because that would be huge, but when it's stretched out, it needs to be able to stretch the diameter of your instep. So that's what you need to know, is that if your Colourwork socks are not going over your heel, it's because they need to stretch to the diameter of that instep, not the width of your foot. So that's where we are. And if you get to the point where you know what size they need to be and they're still not big enough, you generally have two options. You can go up a needle size, or you can go up a sock size. So if I'm talking about a pair of Colourwork socks, what I will tend to do is I will knit my cuff on a 2.25mm needle, because that's what I like. I like it to be nice and snug, and I will do 72 stitches. That is my usual vanilla sock recipe cuff size, so that's what I'll do. Then when I get to the end of the cuff and I switch to my 2.5mm needles, which again is my preference, I will then increase up to the next size in a pattern, which is usually 80 stitches or even 84 stitches. I will increase up to that size. I will knit the Colourwork section in that size, sometimes even in a 2.75mm needle. The thing about sock knitting for me, in particular colourwork sock knitting, is that there will be stitch counts and needle sizes specified in your pattern. But if you need to, throw them away. Throw them away. What we're looking for with the sock pattern is the general construction. We are looking for the texture of the stitches, the shapes, the colourwork charts, but the construction of the sock itself can always be changed to fit your preferences. So, you know, if a sock was like this and it was colourwork and it said knit the whole thing on a 2.5mm needle in 72 stitches all the way down, I wouldn't do that. I would not do it because it's not going to work for me. So find out what works for you, particularly on a colourwork sock, because what works for you on a vanilla sock may not work for you on a colourwork sock. And then apply that to those patterns. So I would knit a 2.25 cuff, 72 stitches. I would then increase up to the next size on the pattern, knit any colourwork sections in that colourwork pattern on a 2.75mm needle to make them wide enough to fit that 16cm diameter of my instep. Then I will increase back down and I'll be on my way. Another tip is that when it comes to heel types, again for colourwork, often they will have like a short row heel or an afterthought heel. If I can, if there is no colourwork on the heel, on the main part of the foot, I will switch it for a heel flap and gusset, regardless of what the pattern suggests. Again, the pattern is a guide, you can change it. If not, I will switch it to an afterthought heel / forethought heel, because then I can do an extra few rounds. I generally do about 6 rounds on my afterthought heels before I start decreasing, and that again just gives you a little bit of extra width at the instep, which generally is going to be the bit that is really hard to get over your foot to fit comfortably. So those are the sort of elements you need to think about. You need to think about the cuff section being wide enough. Again, when you get past the heel, you can always decrease down to a smaller size if that's what you need. Just think about the components of the sock. The cuff, that's the only bit that needs to get past your instep. So make that, so you can make this bit nice and tight so it stays up, and then you can make this bit nice and loose. Then your heel, sub in whatever heel you like that works for you, and then the foot and the toe. So you can change things. You do not have to stick to one set of stitch counts. This video is going to be so long. Another tip that I know a lot of people have mentioned is don't catch floats. You are not going to put a toe through your sock. It's just not going to happen. I know a lot of people say catch floats, but they start to felt on the inside of a pair of socks anyway, and they're all stretched out when you're trying to put them on. Don't catch the floats. It's not going to be a trouble. Once they're on, they're on. Don't worry about it. I've never caught a toe in a long float, and I do not catch floats in my colourwork because it just makes them smaller. So I've got floats that sort of go well over an inch, and don't catch them. And I would say my last tip for colourwork is that if you're still using DPNs or Magic Loop, do seriously consider the 9-inch circular, because I found that the biggest problem when I was using DPNs for colourwork was managing the joins between the needles. With 9-inch circulars, there are no joins between needles. So you can just seamlessly work those colourwork stitches without having to worry about whether your colourwork is going to fall over that, and you're trying to carry floats across the joins in your DPNs. It's messy, I don't like it, so I don't do it. I will just give a final note on blocking, and that is, in my opinion, sock blockers are quite unnecessary, and that if you don't have them, it's not within your budget to get them, I wouldn't worry about it. It's not essential. I like them because when I finish a pair of socks, I like to take a picture of them. And when I put them on here, it makes them look like that absolute perfect sock shape. They look wonderful, but it's not essential. Just wash them and lay them out, and that will even out your stitches. At the end of the day, when they're on your feet, they're going to be foot shaped. So it's not essential. If you like them and you have them, use them because it looks pretty. But other than looking perfectly pretty when you gift them or when you post pictures of them, it's not necessary. These are fairly expensive. A set of these, I think they're the Knit Pro ones, is like £17 or something. And that is just my foot size. If I wanted to knit smaller or bigger, I'd need to get a different set. And it's worth it to me because I like them, but they are non-essential. Right, so then I just wanted to talk through a few of my just random favourites to do with sock knitting. The first one I will say, I've mentioned this on podcasts before, my Dyson portable yarn holder. This is lovely for sock knitting because, again, one of my favourite things about sock knitting is the fact that it is so portable. So to be able to put that on your wrist and just go, and then you can, like, I even knit socks whilst I'm walking. And it's just lovely. It makes it so easy, and that's when I use this the most. I don't really use this on big projects because with the big projects I'm not too worried about the portability anyway, but with socks it's so lovely to have this, and it just makes the portability of the project even better. Next, I'm going to talk about a couple of books. And this is my favourite beginner sock knitting book. This is The Sock Project by Summer Lee. If you know, again, Summer Lee is one of the absolute legends of sock knitting, particularly here on YouTube. And this book just talks you through everything you could want to know about knitting basic socks. So she has recipes in there for fingering weight socks, for DK weight socks, for various different colour work, loads of different heel types. She goes into some basic lace patterns, some stripes, some cables. It's just a really good all-rounder, and this is the book a gift to people if they want to start knitting socks, because it's just got so much detail in there, put quite simply with lots and lots of pictures that just give you everything that you could need to know about starting knitting socks. And if you knit your way through this book, you will be a master. The other one is the beautiful Lane 52 Weeks of Socks. This is volume 2, and I got volume 2 simply because I like the patterns so much. But these books are just so beautiful, and it is just, they're just so stunning. So it's collecting up and looking at beautiful textures and colour work is one of my favourite things about sock knitting. They're just stunning, and yeah, I so recommend getting your hands on some beautiful sock knitting books because they will just inspire you endlessly. The next thing is hand-dyed yarn. I have a little tradition. Again, another reason I love sock knitting is because you can buy yourself one skein of hand-dyed yarn and produce something beautiful with it. So it's a relatively inexpensive way to use beautiful yarn. So when I travel, I like to find a local yarn store and pick up a beautiful skein that sort of reminds me of the area. So for example, this one, the Camel's Yarn, inspired by Cornwall. This colourway is called Land's End, and we went to Cornwall, and we didn't go to Land's End, but we did go to Lizard Point, which is the sort of equivalent on the other side. And this reminded me of that landscape so much, with the sort of heather, purple, and the blues and the greens of the sea. It just captured that perfectly. And this can become, I just need this one and it will become a beautiful pair of socks. Another one is this one, which I picked up at Peak District Yarns in Tidswell when we went to the Peak District. And again, this beautiful neppy hand-dyed skein will become something wonderful, probably a pair of socks. So it's just the thing that you can pick up these beautiful one-off skeins, and you'll end up with something beautiful from only one skein. So now I'm just going to get onto the Q&A. There may be some questions that were asked that I have already covered in this video that is already far too long, but if not, we will go through. Oh, so I have a question from In Her Skein, which was the designer we were talking about earlier, who I forgot to mention actually designs socks for a regular instep and high instep. So that's an option in her patterns, which I've never seen before and I really appreciate. So I will absolutely be knitting up a pair of those. And she asks, if you could only use one sock yarn for the rest of your life, which one would you choose? And this is really difficult actually, because I feel like there's so many yarns I've not tried yet and I really want to try. I would say Dropz Fable. It is cheap and cheerful. I have it in basically every colour. And even though it's cheap, it's not particularly soft. It's almost a little bit scratchy. But this is one of my oldest pairs of socks and the stitch definition on this is fabulous. The heel actually was knit in Dropz Nord, so that's the alpaca one, so that's felted quite a bit more. But the Dropz Fable is so durable, so durable. I think what it gives up on the softness, it gains in stitch definition and durability. You know, this is probably my most worn sock, and it probably looks like my least worn sock. This was the first sock I ever knit and I absolutely wore it to death, still do, and there are basically no signs of wear. So it's cheap and cheerful and it will last you and be so durable, so much more durable than a lot of the really fancy sock yarns. Any tips on how to avoid holes along the heels? Yes, my favourite thing to do is to, when I'm picking up stitches for heels, I pick up an extra stitch and I knit it through the back loop so it's twisted. I've seen that tip. I can't remember where I saw that tip, but I always do it to avoid those characteristic holes you get in the corners of sock heels. Right, what is your favourite heel, look-wise and fit-wise? Fit-wise, it's the heel flap and gusset. I absolutely love the heel flap and gusset because nothing fits a high instep quite so well. In terms of look-wise, I love the afterthought heel because it gives that really rounded foot shape, but again I can get a good fit on it. So I always add in some extra rows and it's perfect for adding into Colourwork socks. So I always do that instead of a short row heel. I don't like a short row heel because to me I can never get it looking not messy, and I love the fact that if I put the heel in on an afterthought heel and it doesn't fit right, I can just rip it out. So it's really handy for getting a good fit on Colourwork socks. If I am knitting in the round, I can never get the first round to join well. It's always too loose. Yes, I have a tip for this, and I will try and find a tutorial for you to link in the description below. What I do is I always cast on an extra stitch and then I knit the first and the last stitch together. Or you can cross over the first and the last stitch, but that's a lot more fiddly. I think the easiest thing to do is to cast on that extra stitch and then to slip the last stitch over to the other needle and to knit the last stitch and the first stitch of the cast on edge together, and then that holds them together tightly. Best stretchy cast on for cuff down socks. I like the long tail cast on method because it's easy and it's really stretchy. How to avoid hand pain. Now this is a tricky one. I will link a video for you by Norman from Nimble Needles, who walks through all of the stretches and exercise that you can do to try and avoid hand pain. So I always try and do that. But I think when working with something small circumference, I do tend to knit in smaller stints. I don't tend to do a sock in really long stints to avoid hand pain, but I would also say just try and relax. As I was trying to show earlier, I don't like grip the needles. I try and grip the fabric, because when I grip the needles I found that that was what was giving me hand pain and making me really uncomfortable, because they're so small and awkward to hold. So try and relax your wrists, relax your hands, and if you can, try and hold your piece looser and try and manipulate the fabric more than you manipulate the tiny little needles, because that's what's going to strain your hands. I would love to know how to adapt a pattern for wider feet. So this is one of the things that we've talked about. What I would do is to treat each segment of your foot individually and try and get your cuff to fit to be wide enough to go over that instep, to get your leg to fit, whether that's increasing your stitch count and then decreasing back after the foot. Try and treat every section differently and then test out different options such as increasing stitch count, increasing your needle size. Try and test out those things until you can work out what really works for you in terms of fitting you well. And I always try and do that small 2.25mm cuff, so that if I give myself loads of room in the foot, it still stays up. That's probably my sort of top tip, really. Don't take your pattern as gospel. If you need to change to a heel flap and gusset, do that. If you need to use different stitch counts at different parts of the socks, do that. How to gift knit socks without having to ask weird questions. If you know their shoe size, which always can throw them off because then they'll think you're buying them shoes. I believe there's like sock rulers that you can get that you put in the sock. Other than that, I don't know how you'd be able to avoid asking questions. I suppose maybe have a good look at their feet and see what kind of shoes they wear. If they wear something like, you know, Doc Martens, they probably prefer roomier shoes. If they wear like Converse, they probably have narrow feet. Yeah, I think you kind of need to know their shoe size really to be able to make a good fitting pair. If anyone has any tips on that, leave them below, because that's a really interesting point. All the tips for colourwork, mine are all too tight. I hope I have given you some ideas. If not, leave a comment below or message me on Instagram and we will troubleshoot further, because we will get you into a sock that fits. How do you get the motivation to knit the second sock? This is a good one. If I am I don't always, I do have unclaimed single socks, but generally what I try and do is I either cast the second sock on immediately when I finish the first one, so it's already on the needles and then you've got no excuses, or I try and knit them simultaneously. So I have like 2 pairs of 2.5mm needles, so I'll knit like the cuff of one and then the cuff of another and then the leg of one and then the leg of another and the heel of one, so that, you know, you're not knitting them 2 at a time, which a lot of people do to avoid that, but I don't like magic loop and that uses magic loop. So if you do like magic loop, you could look into 2 at a time sock knitting. I'm trying to figure out changes to patterns to make around the heel tighter, if you have any tips. I would say if you're doing a heel flap and gusset, pick up less stitches to make the heel flap and the gusset shorter, because if your heel is shorter, it's going to be tighter on the instep. If you are doing like an afterthought heel, you could decrease more rapidly. And also if you're doing your sock gusset, you could decrease more rapidly and that will get it smaller quicker. It depends if you need less space on the instep or if it's around the actual heel. I think for smaller feet, often like afterthought heels can work really well, because they do tend to have less room, but then you can always pick up less stitches. If you do an afterthought heel, instead of doing half of the stitches of the needle, you could do a few less. And the other way, if you need it wider, you can do a few more. So again, don't take the sock heel that is in your pattern as gospel. Do what works for you. And I think that is all the questions I got that I hadn't already addressed in the rest of the video. So hopefully I've managed to edit this so it's not quite so long. But when I get started talking about socks, I'm off on one, because I love it. And I really, really hope that I have managed to give you guys some tips that will help you perfect your socks today. And if you have any tips that I've not covered that you'd like to share with the group, please do. That would be fabulous. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been so nice to just spend a little bit of time chatting about socks, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.